My name is Lena Hart, and last Christmas was the night I learned what family really meant and what it didn't. It happened under a chandelier worth more than my rent in a house that never felt like mine, surrounded by people who pretended I didn't exist until they needed someone to blame. I was carrying a tray of roasted vegetables toward the dining table when my grandmother Evelyn reached for a glass of water. Her hand trembled just slightly, and the crystal slipped. The sound was sharp, bright, and far too loud for a room full of people desperate to look perfect. The glass shattered across the marble floor. Before I could kneel to help her, Talia, Rowan the hostess, my mother's cousin, shot up from her chair. "For God's sake, Evelyn," she snapped, snatching a napkin like she was wiping filth instead of water. "If you can't control yourself, maybe you shouldn't be here." The entire table froze. My grandmother's face crumpled, the kind of hurt you don't shake off, the kind that shows every year of a life spent swallowing insults. I stepped forward, but Mark Rowan's voice cut through the room like ice. "Both of you, out." I heard murmurs. Someone gasping. Someone whispering, but no one stood up. No one defended her. No one defended us. Not even the people who shared our blood. Mark grabbed Evelyn's wrist a little too hard as he pointed toward the door. "Take your mess somewhere else." That was the moment I felt something inside me tear cleanly and permanently. I wrapped my arm around my grandmother's shaking shoulders and led her out into the cold December night, the door slamming behind us like a final verdict. I didn't know it then, but that moment, that humiliation, was the first crack in a truth my grandmother had spent a lifetime hiding. The walk back to our apartment felt longer than it ever had, even though it was barely 6 blocks away. Snow clung to my boots in heavy layers, and every time I glanced at my grandmother beside me, a sharp fear twisted in my chest. She was breathing too quickly, her frail hands gripping the sleeves of my coat, as if the cold might swallow her whole. I tightened my hold around her shoulders, trying to shield her from the wind that cut through the night like broken glass. When we finally reached the cracked steps of our building, Evelyn paused, her knees trembling. "I'm all right," she whispered, but the way her voice shook told me she wasn't. I hurried to unlock the door, guided her inside, and helped her sink gently onto the old floral sofa that had lost most of its cushion years ago. The heater clicked twice, coughed, and then died again. I grabbed the thickest blanket we owned and wrapped it around her shoulders. She tried to smile, but her lips were pale, her breath shallow. The humiliation from the Rowan house still hung over her like smoke, and for the first time in my life, I saw something worse than hurt in her eyes. Fear. I knelt in front of her. "Grandma, talk to me. Are you dizzy? Does your chest hurt?" She shook her head slowly. "No, sweetheart. Just give me a moment." Her hand reached for mine, cold and light as paper. I held it to warm her fingers, but inside my stomach churned. The Rowans had pushed us out like we were a stain on their perfect evening, but this fragile, trembling moment was the part that truly broke me. "Lena," she murmured, her voice thinning. "I'm so sorry you had to see that." I shook my head. "You didn't do anything wrong." Her eyes glistened, reflecting the dim lamplight. "There are things you don't know yet." Something in her tone made my heartbeat stutter. A warning, a beginning, a door I didn't realize was about to open. That night I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the way my grandmother's fingers trembled when she reached for that glass, the way the Rowans stared at her like she was an inconvenience instead of the woman who had raised me. I kept replaying the scene, tightening my jaw until it ached. Around 3 a.m, I gave up on sleep entirely and sat by the small kitchen counter, listening to the faint hum of the refrigerator that somehow still worked better than the heater. A soft rustle came from the living room. I turned and saw Grandma Evelyn shifting upright on the sofa, her blanket slipping off her shoulder. I hurried toward her to tuck it back into place, but she caught my wrist before I could. "Lena," she said quietly, "come sit." Her voice had changed. Not weak, not trembling, steady. Too steady. I sat beside her, waiting for her to continue. She took a deep breath, the kind people take right before jumping into cold water. "There's something I need to tell you," she said, eyes fixed on the dark window across from us. "Something I should have told you years ago." My stomach tensed. "Grandma, whatever it is." She squeezed my hand gently. "No, you need to listen first." Her gaze drifted toward the tiny corner of our apartment where we kept a shelf of old photographs. Most were faded shots of me at school events, birthdays spent just the two of us, or pictures of Evelyn from her younger days, smiling bright-eyed, standing beside a woman I had never seen but guessed was my mother. There were no pictures of the Rowans. Not one. "I wasn't always living like this," she said softly. "And neither were you. But I made choices. Choices to protect you." She paused, swallowing a tremor. "And now, after what happened tonight, I think it's time you learned the truth." A chill rippled through me, sharper than the winter outside. Her fingers slipped from mine as she reached into the pocket of her cardigan and pulled out a single old-fashioned key. "Tomorrow," she whispered, placing it in my palm. "You'll need this." The next morning felt heavier than the snow piled against our windows. I made oatmeal the way Grandma liked it, with a little honey and a pinch of cinnamon, but she barely touched it. She stared at the key resting on the coffee table, its metal catching the weak winter light, as if it weighed more than everything we owned combined. I waited for her to say something, anything, but she only whispered, "After breakfast." Except she didn't eat. Her hands shook again, worse than the night before, when she tried to stand, her knees buckled. I lunged forward just in time, guiding her back to the sofa. Her breath rattled thin and uneven. "Grandma, we need to go to the hospital." "No," she gasped. "No hospitals. Not yet. Lena, listen." But the rest of her words dissolved into a cough that bent her in half. Panic surged through me. I grabbed my coat and my phone. I didn't care about the key. I didn't care about secrets. I just needed her to breathe. She clutched my wrist again, her grip weak but desperate. If something happens to me," she whispered, "go to the address taped under the kitchen drawer. Use the key. Don't trust anyone with the name Rowan." My heart thudded painfully. "Grandma, stop. You can tell me everything later. Please, let's just go." She tried to speak, but her lips turned pale, her body suddenly limp against the cushions. My scream felt like it cracked the apartment walls. I fumbled to dial 911, my hands shaking so violently I could barely hold the phone. The sirens arrived fast, painting red and blue flashes across our building's peeling paint. I followed the paramedics down the stairs, clutching the key so tightly it dug into my palm. At the hospital, they rushed her past double doors I wasn't allowed to cross. A nurse told me to wait. I did, for hours, but when the doctor finally came out, his expression told me everything before he even opened his mouth. My grandmother, my only real family, was gone, and all I had left was the key she pressed into my hand. I don't remember walking home from the hospital. Grief does something strange to time. It stretches, it blurs, it pulls hours apart until everything feels unreal. When I finally reached our apartment, the silence hit harder than any winter wind. Her blanket was still on the sofa. Her cup was still on the counter. And the key she'd given me lay exactly where I dropped it, glinting softly like it was waiting. I sank to my knees on the kitchen floor, unable to breathe. Losing her felt like someone had torn the roof off my life and left me standing in a storm. For a long time I stayed there, clutching the edge of the counter, trying to keep myself from falling apart completely. When the trembling finally eased, I remembered her last words. "The address is taped under the kitchen drawer." My hands shook as I pulled the drawer open. It jammed halfway like it always did, but I yanked harder until it screeched free. Beneath the wooden lip was a small strip of yellowing tape holding a folded slip of paper. An address. No name, no explanation, just a place. I stared at it, unsure whether to curse her or thank her. Even now, especially now, she was still guiding me somewhere I didn't understand. I tucked the paper into my pocket and stood, forcing my legs to hold me. It took only 20 minutes to reach the edge of town, to a street I'd never walked before. The houses grew older here, brick, weathered wood, sagging porches. And then I found it, a long, narrow building hidden behind an overgrown fence. The number on the mailbox matched the address. My fingers tightened around the key as I stepped through the gate. The air felt different here, still heavy, expectant, as if the building itself knew who I was. The key fit on the first try. Inside, dust floated in thick beams of light. Wooden shelves lined the walls from floor to ceiling. Boxes, files, leather-bound folders, and on the far table a stack of documents with my grandmother's handwriting on the top sheet. My heart pounded. Whatever secret she died protecting it was waiting for me in this room. The smell of old paper clung to the air, thick and oddly familiar, as if it had been waiting for decades to be disturbed. I stepped farther into the room, my fingers trembling as I reached for the top folder. The handwriting on the tab stopped me cold. E. Moore, my grandmother's initials. I opened it slowly. Inside were documents. Contracts, letters board, meeting minutes each stamped with the same corporate logo, Moore and Rowan Development Group. My eyes widened. Rowan. The name felt like poison on my tongue. As I flipped through the pages, the truth began unraveling with a violence that took the breath out of me. My grandmother hadn't been just someone who once worked with them, as the Rowans liked to imply at holiday dinners. She had been more, much more. The records showed her signature as co-founder, her shares originally listed at 40%. And then years later, documents appeared with her name crossed out, replaced by Mark Rowan's. The dates overlapped suspiciously with hospital invoices I recognized from when she'd fallen ill decades ago. It wasn't just erasure, it was theft. My pulse hammered as I uncovered another folder, this one filled with letters from a law firm. Every letter carried the same message: Withdraw your claim or we will proceed with litigation. The last one, dated 12 years ago, had a handwritten note from my grandmother at the bottom. For Lena's safety, I'll walk away. The room spun. My grandmother hadn't been poor, she had been punished, threatened, forced into silence. Suddenly, footsteps sounded behind me. I turned sharply. Cole Rowan stood in the doorway, breath visible in the cold air, his expression knotted with something between shock and guilt. I thought this place was shut down, he said quietly. His eyes drifted to the files clutched in my hand. You shouldn't be here. I have every right to be here. I shot back, my voice raw. This is my grandmother's. She built this company with your family. He flinched as if the truth stung. Lena, you don't understand. I stepped closer, anger surging hotter than fear. Then explain it. Explain why my grandmother's name was erased. His throat tightened. Because he whispered my parents made sure no one would ever know what they stole. For a moment, neither of us moved. The cold air coiled around us like a warning, heavy with everything unsaid. Cole stepped farther into the room, his eyes scanning the walls crammed with evidence, with pieces of a truth his family had buried long before he was old enough to understand it. Lena, he whispered, if my parents know you're here. I cut him off. They will, and I'm counting on it. His jaw tightened. You don't know how far they'll go to protect what they built. No, I said, lifting the folder in my hand. I know how far they went to steal what she built. He looked at the papers, and for the first time he didn't try to deny it. His voice softened into something small. I found out when I was 18. I asked them questions. They shut me out. After that, I stopped asking. I felt the anger rise hot and sharp. You didn't stop asking. You stopped looking. He flinched but didn't look away. You're right. A painful silence stretched between us, broken only by the distant creak of the old building settling in the cold. Then he said something that made my stomach twist. They're having a shareholders meeting tonight. Everything my parents ever took. They're about to secure it permanently. The words landed like a strike. Of course. They wanted to seal the past before it could haunt them again. Where I asked, Cole hesitated. Lena, if you walk into that room, they will come after you. My mother, my father. They don't lose. I stepped past him, gathering every folder I could carry. My heartbeat steadied with a clarity that felt like steel. They already lost, I said. They just don't know it yet. Cole grabbed my arm, not to stop me, but to make me turn toward him. His expression was grave, conflicted, raw. If you go, he said quietly, I'm going with you. For the first time since my grandmother died, something inside me steadied. Not hope, not trust, but resolve. Then let's finish what they started, I said. And together we walked out of the building toward the meeting that would burn their empire to the ground. The Rowan headquarters looked like a monument to everything my grandmother had lost. Polished glass, towering columns, the kind of place built to intimidate. But as I walked through the revolving doors with the folders pressed against my chest, I didn't feel small. Cole walked beside me, silent but unwavering, the tension in his clenched jaw betraying the war inside him. We reached the conference floor just as the meeting began. The boardroom was filled with tailored suits and polite, hollow laughter, the kind of laughter people use to hide rot. At the head of the table sat Mark and Talia Rowan, looking confident, radiant, untouchable, until they saw me. The room quieted like someone had cut the power. Mark leaned back in his chair, eyes narrowing. What is she doing here? I placed my grandmother's folders on the table, each one landing like a strike. I'm here, I said, because Evelyn Moore deserves her voice back. Talia shot to her feet, color draining from her face. You don't belong here. Security, Cole's voice cut through hers. Sit down, Mom. The shock rippled through the room. Even Mark froze. One by one, I opened the folders, the original contracts with Evelyn's signature, the altered versions bearing Mark's, the letters from the attorneys, the meeting minutes documenting decisions made without legal authority. Gasps broke the silence. Whispers swelled like a rising tide. And then I laid down the final page, my grandmother's sworn statement recorded in her own handwriting. This company wasn't built by thieves, I said softly. It was built by my grandmother. And you stole it all from her. Mark lunged for the documents, but the board members were faster. They gathered around the table, eyes widening as they read outrage replacing confusion. One of the directors turned toward me. Miss Hart, what is it you want? I looked at the signatures on the wall names that had stood there for decades without hers. I thought of her quiet strength, the life she rebuilt in shadows, the love she gave without ever asking for anything back. I want what's rightfully ours, I said. Her shares, her seat, her legacy. Silence followed. Then slowly, one by one, the board members nodded. By the time the vote concluded, Mark and Talia Rowan were removed from power, and I became the majority shareholder of the company my grandmother built. But walking out of that building, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt steady, whole, seen. For the first time in my life, I wasn't standing in someone else's shadow. I was standing exactly where my grandmother always meant for me to be,